Welcome to this week's episode of the And Both podcast. My guest is Allison Prieur. She is a mom to 3 young kids in Ontario and has worked with nonprofits in Canada for over 20 years. During that time, she's recognized the gender and racial disparities that exist in the sector. The social safety net has been downloaded to nonprofit organizations expecting women and racially diverse people to subsidize their incomes with passion. This results in precarious work, generational income gaps, and decreased standard of living for nonprofit workers' families. She is a lifelong learner and is also completing an interdisciplinary PhD in evaluation at Western Michigan University, focusing on how evaluation can support systems change within organizations and in broader social political contexts. She works as an evaluation and organizational learning consultant, balancing entrepreneurship with parenting, school, and community service. I absolutely love this conversation this week because I think that a lot of times when we talk about replacing income with passion and how all of that is a very charged conversation that happens. So when we step outside of that as moms and look at it from an outside perspective, like a regular position, a for-profit position versus a nonprofit position, and where the disparities end up between the two, I think that's a great way to have a conversation about the gaps and the different ways of thinking and how that's not really helping in a lot of ways and ways to move forward. So Allison is incredible, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Here she is. Hello and welcome to the And Both podcast. Here we are going to hear from moms and those in motherhood that are doing the thing that works for them. They are honoring themselves alongside the all-encompassing role and level of expectation that is modern motherhood. And we are going to hear from as many different people as possible in their own experience. So you can find people to relate to. You can hear stories that will make you laugh, make you cry, all of the above, and that we will come together as a community to support one another in a way that is holistic and honoring of the woman and the mother as a whole. Hello and welcome back to the And Both podcast. My guest today is Allison Prieur. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited. I'm always excited. I just love talking to people, and I love talking to people that do cool things and do amazing things. And fortunately for me, everyone checks that box. So it's awesome. Will you tell everyone a little bit about you and what you do, whatever you want people to know?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm an evaluator. I call myself a learning-focused evaluator, and I work mostly with small to mid-sized nonprofits to help them build learning into their organizations, usually using data that they already have, like that they collect for funders, things like that. In addition to that, I am a mom. I have 3 little kids. They're 2, 4, and 6, and pretty active in my community. I like to get involved in different community activities, boards of directors, things like that, but also active in my evaluation community. And I am actually studying as well to do a PhD in evaluation. So just another thing to add on my plate.
Another layer to the dip, right?
Yeah.
That's 2, 4, and 6 and school and feeding and watering yourself. That's solid.
But I feel like I'm going to be like a rock star when I'm done all of this, because if I could do that, then.
Yeah. How far into the program are you?
So I have my comprehensive exams coming up in the beginning of December, and then I'll go into my dissertation. So I had 2 kids when I started. I got pregnant with my 3rd in my first year. So.
Oh my gosh. So yeah. Holy cow, I'm sweating. Comprehensive, just some of the language from that end of school. I'm already sweating. I'm not even taking these exams.
I took it on though. I mean, first of all, I wanted to learn, and I felt like there was something, that I could contribute to what was going on in the field as well. But it was also kind of me time, right? It was like this protected time that nobody was going to say, oh, you know what, I can't make it to watch your kids because I had class. Mm-hmm. And so it was a weird way of adding that back into my life.
I love it. So when I was reading through the stuff that you had written, talked a lot about the work with nonprofits. And as a Canadian, let's just get out the gate. So I am Canadian. I did naturalize recently to vote. And there's a whole thing about that. When this episode comes out, we'll be many, many months down the line. The sting will still be fresh. However, we're there. But I think it's interesting that I've had a lot of Canadians on the podcast, and maybe I just like wave the maple leaf from America and people find me, or it's just that I don't know. I don't know how people find me, but it's interesting to me that there's so many people that are coming on that are sort of that have this perspective of like, what we're doing as Canadians, I think is a lot of times it's assumed that we just give and we are like warm and friendly and like we just do the right thing. And history shows in a lot of ways that's correct. But I think that sometimes that gets trampled on. And you spoke a little bit about that in the little, in the piece that you sent me. So I'd love to talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been talking about it as like we're expected to, in nonprofit work anyway, we're expected to like subsidize our own wages with our passion. Like you're going to take this lower paying job, but you love it and you're doing good work. So it's okay. And, maybe that worked for a while when the economy was set up for like a one parent, a one breadwinner household where women could go out to work just as like as a passion project or as a side project. And that's not how things are anymore. And so I think there's a lot of problems with it, including risk around financial stability for the, women majority sector. And it's a huge contributor to the economy in both US and Canada, the nonprofit sector. And so being able to, you talk a lot about valuing that caregiving work. And this is another aspect of it, right? Being able to value the work that folks are doing with also the expertise that we have. Like it's a highly educated sector. And one of the real critical things for me is that if we don't start doing that, I find the organizations that I work for and with are having a lot more trouble finding people to work in this sector. And it's because there are other sectors that do value their work and their expertise. But at an individual level, that's one thing to make a choice to leave the nonprofit sector or not to come into the nonprofit sector. And at a collective level, that really creates some challenges with, social safety net that was designed to have these kinds of supports available.
Yeah, I think, I do. I think that it's really interesting because that idea of like, but you're doing the right thing and you're doing the good thing and you're doing the, the thing to help uplift all of the people around you. Look at you. You are so fortunate. You have this, financial stability, or you have the time, or you have whatever, or you have to find the time is feels like a lot of the messaging. But you can't call your electric company and be like, I'm a really good person, so could you leave the lights on? They didn't actually pay me what I need to live.
Exactly.
But like somebody told me that I was doing a really good job because I'm doing this selfless work. And like that the bridge, like you're saying, the divide between what we want to do and what we have to do in order to survive on our own is getting wider. I think that's the way I want to go with that reference. It's getting much wider. And so people are sort of like, I really want to do that and I have a passion for that and I want to help, but I can't just like throw my family into financial chaos or whatnot in order to make that happen.
Exactly. And it continues to be a gendered expectation from what I can tell. I've heard people talk about, I'm going to hire this person to come work in like the municipality or in, a public sector, like in a better paying job, a more stable, secure job, because they have a family. And it's always men when they're saying that. And so, like, I hope that we get to a point where we are actually reflecting on those comments and realizing and those decisions, more importantly.
I say, sometimes when you write like little like blurbs about yourself or whatever, I say like, PTA dropout kind of thing. And one of the reasons why is because when my oldest was in her elementary school and I got involved with the PTA initially, right? It's this idea of like community and, your kids are going to be there. I had 3 kids then. It was like, I'm going to put a lot of kids through this school. Like I want to be involved, yada, yada, right? What are the things you sign up for? The bake sale, the teacher appreciation lunch, yada, yada, right? You go to the meeting. There's no men at the meeting. There's no dads at the meeting. There's 2 in one of my kids' schools. There's 2 men that work there. One's a gym teacher and one's an art teacher.
Wow.
Everyone else is a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it's all about this like bake sale and bake things and bake. And you look at the sign up and it's all women who are baking, who are dropping things off and all of that stuff. And I'm like, oh my God. But when my daughter was in kindergarten, the PTA was broke. It was this whole thing of like, we don't have the funding, yada, yada. I was like, why don't we have a golf tournament? And they're like, well, what? I mean, yeah, like, I guess that could work or whatever. And I was like, none of the events that you guys are hosting or that you guys are putting on
actually make money.
Appeals, well, they don't make money, and B, appeals to dads. And it's this idea of like, okay, I'm not going to go out there and change the minds of like all of these dads to be like, you actually do want to make muffins. Like, this is doing a good job. It's like, all right, well, if you don't want to hang out here, but you want to hang out on a golf course, let's do that. And lo and behold, it worked. There's like $7,000 raised in the first year. And they were like, I can't believe a golf tournament. And I'm like, you have to appeal to everybody. But it's this idea of like, we're just going to keep making muffins or we're going to keep selling cookies.
This is how we've always done it. Exactly. Yeah.
We can't, it's that like, dude, it's the chicken or the egg. Like, we can't just keep having the same stuff and saying, you guys should get involved versus like, okay, we have to go about this in a different way. And I feel like there is this not so undercurrent of for-profit companies doing work that nonprofit companies did. But when those for-profit companies are headed by men, nobody bats an eyelash about it.
Yeah. And often, if you actually look at the outcomes, it's the nonprofits who are achieving the outcomes, because so often, like, I mean, that's it, right? What if your goal is profit, then is your goal actually social betterment? Probably not. But I think by like under-resourcing the nonprofit sector, we are forcing them to focus on money as like a main attention, like source of attention for them, right? Because they like most of the organizations I work with are in Q4 still not exactly sure how the budget's going to balance by the end of the year, right? And so that's a huge thing. And these are those small to mid-size. So when you look at like the gender breakdown in the sector, often the male-led organizations tend to be those bigger organizations that are, they're attracting more funds, they're attracting more attention. And those smaller organizations that are on the ground doing the work, like keeping people alive, keeping people in homes, the real like necessary work are those lower resourced and, more challenging to just be in and to operate. And I think that creates a ripple effect within the organization and then within the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a really great friend who's one of those people that like is, like a Mother Teresa, who's just sort of like, I just show up and do the things. And I'm always so amazed. Like, she has 4 kids and she is, she's a writer and she does all of this work to help other people. But then on top of that, she's like super involved in her community in terms of like exactly what you're working on, right? It's like keeping people fed and keeping people housed and keeping people safe. And I think about like how many of those people, like I wish there was like a black light for like good, because I just feel like if you could just blacklight a community, like all of these people that you wouldn't, that don't like, she's not on social media posting about all the wonderful things she's doing. She just the wonderful things. And I'm like, I just wish that there was so much more focus on that and supporting people in that role that are doing those things from that altruistic perspective.
Yeah.
Where like, you did a really great job with your marketing campaign. And so now such and such company grows and blah, blah, blah.
Right. No, exactly. And that's it. I think the focus, it's really hard to focus on like telling the stories. And I think we're also so immersed in it that we don't realize that the stories are worth telling sometimes. We're just like your friend, just doing the thing, like it just needed to be done. So I jumped in and I did it. But, it is really important for other people to hear how those things get done and what would be the risk if they weren't getting done,
Yeah, I think it's really amazing to me that it's still such an undertone. However, like we just went through a whole pandemic where none of that stuff could be hidden because I mean, nothing could be hidden, right? Like everyone's cameras in everyone's living room. And there's always like, my favorite pandemic story is the mom who's getting out of the shower and her kid is on a Zoom call and she's like naked and now she's naked in front of the classroom. Oh my God. It was like it wasn't, it wasn't like a huge news thing or whatever, but it was like a meme kind of story. And she was just like, yeah, like this is my pandemic life. And I'm like,
Right.
nothing sums it up better than
Yeah.
just hanging out in second grade, not a stitch of clothing on. Uh,
You're totally right. Like, it's also, it's funny because I was thinking about that this morning. Like, that's part of our reality, I find, as moms, that, like, yeah, sometimes you end up without clothes on around your kids because, like, you have to do all the things. And so you don't have that dignity of privacy to be able to, like, get yourself ready for the day. But like you just said, that's like a huge eye opener for everyone else that, like, oh, yeah, this is the reality of life, life as a mom, life in a home, like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And just pointing out, like, on that social, like, when everyone's like hanging out, banging on frying pans for the nurses changing shift, it's like, that's great. But that was for a short period of time. And it's not like people didn't get sick and people weren't still dying and people still didn't need care and families weren't being displaced because of income or childcare or schooling or whatever. So it's just this, like, it's like, how do you make it sexy so that people pay attention to it? Because really, unless you're like TikTok dancing while you're dropping off meals for people, it just never lives at the top of mind.
No, absolutely. And I do a lot of work with an organization that keeps people in their homes. So people who have disabilities, helps people get out of hospital into home, and it keeps people by providing supports within their homes. And we had to fight really hard. I was on the board at the time, and we had to fight really hard to get them the wage increases that were offered, public healthcare, right? But the wage increases that were offered to, like, hospital staff and long-term care staff were both receiving these wage increases. And we were like, what about these folks who are actually, like, really helping with this major problem that's happening in hospitals and long-term care? Like, they're keeping so many folks housed and safely and out of hospital. Mm-hmm. And, we were successful. We ended up, I think there was enough, clamoring across the province, but it was a surprise to me, I guess, that those roles weren't recognized in the same way.
Yeah. I think that's like, that may be a little bit more of the south of the border lens that I have in terms of, like, the people here in this healthcare system that spend the most time in contact with patients are the least paid, the least reimbursed for it.
Yeah.
And, and here, like, we have this very, very, very rapidly widening care gap as so many Americans, 10,000 Americans a day turn 65, and they're going to do it every day in between now and 2030.
Wow.
So by 2030, I think it's 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people in the US will be over the age of 65.
Wow.
There's going to be more people in the, senior plus categories of life than there are going to be people under the age of 18.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's just, it's mind-boggling to me because, first of all, you have that divide, right? Like, people are getting older, but they need someone to take care of them at some point. We all are going to need care. Like, we're not like, oh, I can, like, kale smoothie my way out of needing something when I'm 85.
Yeah.
So we're going to need this care. We're not paying the people. The costs of living is rising astronomically. The respect around those professions and what they do, because of this element of, like, if you care enough, then you'll just do whatever. I know people that left acute care and they went into homes to do home care as therapists and nurses, and they're like, not doing it, because you're in someone else's space and someone else is screaming at you, and you do get paid a little bit better down here for home care because of the nature of the job.
Yeah.
But people, it's not a long-term solution for people. I know people that do it because their schedule allows for them to drop their kids off at school and pick them up at school.
Right.
And it's that kind of flexibility that they're looking for, but no one's in it for the long term anymore because.
Right. And that's where we're heading to a crisis over here as well, right? Like, being able to staff those positions, that those needs are only increasing, and our ability to recruit people into the positions is decreasing. Because if you can make the same amount of money, and over here we have a strong minimum wage, right? So if you can make the same amount of money doing, like, some service work, like, not that that's not also hard, but it's a different kind of hard from, like, that, real deep home care work. Why would you choose the one where you're, like, it's impossible to leave that work? I think that's what I think about a lot in the nonprofit sector. It's impossible to leave it at work. right? Where so
Yeah.
many jobs you can clock out at the end of the day and they say, oh, I leave my work at the office or at the factory or whatever, right? But when you're actually dealing with humans and humans who are being like held back by the system, it's really hard to not think about that when you get home and you're now like in another caregiving position or, just trying to live your life. So I think that's something that's not recognized and that also needs to be valued is like that mental effect that comes from working in the sector and seeing all of the problems in like living color.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, when people say like the grass is always greener, right? So people are like, oh, well, in Canada, you just like, I think honestly, and I still think that this is hilarious. Like people down here that I speak to think that you are born in Canada and you go to the hospital and you go home. And it's like, it's this weird, like people don't. Yes, you go to the hospital and you leave and there's no billing department. Like nobody chases you down in the parking lot for your credit card and all of that. Like that's great. But like my mom had an MRI at 2:30 in the morning because that was her scheduled time.
Yeah.
So it's like it's not like people want the convenience of the American system, but they want the pay of the Canadian system.
Yeah.
And that doesn't exist in either place. So like,
No,
yes,
exactly.
you can get the New England Patriots have an MRI machine in their facility.
Wow. Yeah.
Like that's great for them. I'm really excited for them. That's awesome. They're not farming it out so that people in the community who can't afford to go to the hospital and have a $2,000 MRI done are getting it done because it's not a socialized system. But you're not getting like you can't people just sort of cherry pick like the good. It must be so nice to be Canadian because you don't have to worry about healthcare and you don't have to worry about this and you don't have to worry about that. And I'm like, the problems are the same.
Yeah.
It's just the breakdown in the chain of whatever is very different.
No, exactly. Like where you have to stress about it shifts, and there's, a lot of having to try to navigate over here, those kinds of systems too, to figure out like, okay, I've had to go with my kids actually to hospitals in the US. And I'm like, this is so streamlined. Like, oh my goodness, I just like had the x-ray, the whatever, the treatment all in one place. This is amazing. And, thankfully have insurance. So it was okay for me. But over here, it's a lot more individual navigation. So, I have definitely been in those late night MRI situations as well. And so you have less individual control, less choice. And I think there's just the healthcare sector has also been under-resourced over time as well. And we're paying for it, right? It comes out of our taxes. It's not like there's some fairy that's the healthcare fairy and giving it to us for free. But, yeah.
I saw a thing. I read an article in the New York Times. It was about a woman that I want to say it's Germany, but that might be completely wrong. But it was some European country that she said like the cost of co-pays and co-insurance and all of these other separate charges for her to get stuff done versus getting on a plane and flying to Germany and doing like and it was a whole, like she walked through her whole day. Like she went to the dentist, she got x-rays, she got a blood work done, she had an echo done because she had some whatever. She had all of these things, like 10 or 12 tests and steps. They were all done in the same building. They were all done in the same day. And I can't remember what it cost her, but it was like, she said it's hilarious how much she did not pay for it. I don't know how she was able to do it, but it's just this idea of like, that's even better than the Canadian system.
Right.
So it's like it all, it all just sort of comes out in the wash. And I don't know how they make it happen, but Germany is a small country if it was Germany, but they're a small country. And so there's also that perspective. And then you get that medical tourism piece that rolls through the door.
Right. Which has positive and negative implications. So, yeah, I don't think, I just think like the solutions are out there, but like you were saying earlier about the way things have always been done, that's so often the way that we look at things. And it's really, from my perspective, about bringing people together. And that's what I love to do through my work is bringing like diverse groups together. Especially there's one project I'm working on right now, like we were saying about the nonprofits that really got their heads down and kind of doing their own thing, finding solutions to their own problems. But often those solutions are innovative. And so we're bringing a group of them together to do some assessment actually of their workforce well-being. And so we're doing a research project on the well-being of staff in nonprofits. And then what are the systemic factors that have contributed to that well-being or lack thereof. But we're bringing groups together to do that so that they can learn from each other about like, oh, well, we tried this and, now you can try that. And so sometimes it's about, that's part of why I love this podcast is, telling stories about what are happening in one sector or in one place or in one person's life that can apply to others. And, you gain so much inspiration from sharing that experience and those stories. So,
yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I think that's really the heart of it is, everyone, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. This is the reality. And like, this is what I say to my kids, like, even if you have one leg, you still put your pants on one leg at a time. Like as a therapist, I have taught people how to put their pants on. It is
you have never seen it go the other way.
Yeah. Fundamentally, factually true that no matter what, one leg at a time is literally how everyone gets dressed in the morning, right? I mean, there is the odd toddler that lays on the floor and sticks their feet in the air, but that person is not doing it independently. And you and I probably have a lot of more recent experience in that dead bug pants putting on strategy. But so are you finding crossover between different nonprofits in similar impacts on wellness?
Mm-hmm. That's how I ended up in consulting, I think, was that I really loved being able to find those patterns and connect dots between organizations. And so because I've worked internally, I joke that I've always worked in nonprofits. I didn't know there was another career path. I did a couple of stints in government that I call reconnaissance missions, but I always knew this was where I would be. But yes, there are so many similarities. And I think so often organizations, there's a shame about just motherhood, right? There's a shame about experiences that they're having. Like I just said about not being able to balance the budget. I'm constantly telling these organizations, this is not a you problem. This is consistent across so many organizations like yours. And it's a function of the government, especially not sending funding letters until 8 months through the year. How can you ever plan if that's the case, right? Or holding back funds and then suddenly in the last quarter releasing them so that now you have $100,000 to spend in 2 months. And if it's not spent, they're going to take it back. And these are really common challenges that I hope that if we talk about them more, we can actually change those ways, educate people about the impacts of doing things in that way and hopefully make it better. But
yeah. I mean, talk about lack of wellness, thinking that the whole mission that you are working towards and supporting is not going to be funded. And then all of a sudden, a bag of money drops on your doorstep, but there's all sorts of strings and parameters around it.
Yeah. No, exactly. And you can't spend it on the things that you really need. They're going to tell you what you can spend it on. Exactly. And that's stressful for folks. And so, we talk a lot about burnout in the sector, but I think a lot of it is from that, dealing with injustice, so where people are experiencing that mental health issue. I've been calling it society's mental load, right? They're really carrying this burden and there's no, while they may have benefits and EAP, employee assistance programs, things like that, there's no real solutions that they can see coming. So often, actually, when I work with organizations, I tell them, tell your direct service staff what you're doing from an advocacy perspective, because that helps them feel a little bit more hopeful about, what they're experiencing. It also helps them feel understood. And I think that's really critical too, right? Because sometimes direct service staff will be well, nobody gets that it's this hard to find someone an apartment. And it's if you can reflect back to them that yes, we all do get it and allow them to share their experiences with each other, that can really help. I think about from the mother perspective too, what I did not understand the challenges when I was working in nonprofits of motherhood until I became one. And then I looked around and I was is this what you've all been dealing with all of this time? Or is it just me? Right. And so I think being able to talk about those, people bringing their whole selves to work and being able to talk about your whole experience and having flexibility around that, regardless of what, people who have chronic illnesses, other caregiver responsibilities, or just things going on in their life, they're moving, being able to be understanding and flexible. So the work that we're doing is trying to help organizations come up with, obviously there's an advocacy perspective, but there's also non-compensation ways to make the work experience better for people. And so while you're advocating for compensation, what else can you do in your organization so that it's not causing more hardship? on your staff.
Right. Because I mean, even in the for-profit sector, you have people that are like, like lawyers that in a maybe stereotypical sense, like you work long hours. Yeah, you might get all of everything paid for and you might make a boatload of money and all of that stuff. But what is your quality of life?
Yeah.
And at some point you run into like that's at the other end of the scale, right? It's like money and wellness are two things that we cannot avoid. And people don't want to talk about money, but they do want to talk about wellness. And you need one to do the other, and you need in both. And so when you get to that other end of the spectrum, it's like, you can make fabulous money and you can have all of that stuff. But if your life is, pancake bill because it's just you're working all the time, you have no balance, you have no whatever, how do you pull that back? And so, yeah, I love the idea of like not only because if nonprofits just got flooded with cash in a more timely fashion, it sounds like if they just got flooded with cash, it wouldn't eliminate the problems in terms of the mental load and the social component of the work that they do. So trying to address both issues at the same time. I love that approach.
Yeah. And so hopefully that's something that organizations can do. And, I'm really grateful that I get to work with a lot of organizations that are trying things. And so much of it is about like taking a risk and recognizing that the status quo is a risk, right? Like what you're doing right now is risky, especially in this crisis that we're all experiencing around retention in the workforce. Right. And so if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to spend a lot more money trying to recruit people. You're going to have recruits who aren't as trained. And so how can you make changes and take those like intentional and, thoughtful risks that are maybe going to change the budget makeup in the short term? Sometimes it's also like saying no to certain funders, right? If there are funders who are really doing a poor job of valuing the work, especially when, you've submitted a proposal and like funders still do this. I think they actually might do it more over there from some of the conversations I've had of like cutting back wages, saying like, yes, you can have the money, but you can only pay this amount, or you can only hire like less than a full-time equivalent position. Say no. And it's risky and it's hard to say no to that. But if you set that boundary, just like we're setting personal boundaries and hopefully getting better at that, setting those like boundaries on behalf of your organization can go a long way too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that idea of like money makes choice. So it's like, I will give you all the things that you want, but there are so many strings attached to it. And it's that feeling of like, are we going to be able to make the budget? And are we compromising the people that work for this organization? Are we compromising our mission in order to keep the lights on and the doors open?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what do you have at the end of the day? I mean, here there is a rising influx of private equity ownership of daycare centers. I don't know any parent who thinks that that's a great idea.
Right. We have that big debate about that going on here in Ontario as well, with some government-funded childcare, which has been a huge support, but it wasn't extended to private daycare centers. And so there's a real big advocacy effort to extend it to those companies. But yes, I'm with you on that one. So I think it's, again, it's just like where they're able to place their attention. Like if profit is part of your goal, that makes a really different model of service delivery and support.
Yeah. And I think too, like here, if you look at it on face value, like I believe Massachusetts is the most expensive state in the country for daycare. It's like thousands of dollars a month per child. There's a woman that she was on this podcast in earlier episodes, and she pays, I think it's upwards of $60,000 a year for childcare. She has 4 kids, but $60,000 a year. And I think that where that gets really sexy for private investors is it's like, okay, well, if you can make $60,000 a year, if this person spends $60,000 a year and they have 4 kids, how many kids can we get into the daycare center? But you don't consider that the people who are already working in those centers do not get paid exorbitant wages. And so much of I really don't fundamentally understand where a lot of that money goes, because I understand the classroom sizes have to be smaller, but it's the same problem that we have in healthcare, where the people who spend the most time with kids are the ones who get paid or who get compensated in the least like appropriate way for the amount of work that they do and the type of work that they do. And so where is all that going? And I feel like what's happening is that private equity is like, oh, we see calculator like joy over here. So let's get in and let's see if we can skim off the top. And what's going to end up happening is when you stop valuing the people, because people stay in these centers because they, their kids go to school there, or that's their job, or that's for whatever reason they're in there. When you have like a big company come in and say, okay, now we're going to do this, we're going to cut this and this and this, I believe that the first thing that gets attacked, because I've worked for a for-profit hospital, is if you want to work here, that's great. If you don't want to work here, we'll just find somebody else. And unfortunately, they will find somebody else. And they just sort of like run you out the door. But there's so many regulations around daycare, but there's not enough regulations around daycare and childcare centers. There's a lot. I do think that there is a lot of room here for work that you're doing, because it's this idea of like collecting people in different aspects that have same problem, different setting.
Right. So the daycare my kids go to actually was for-profit when they opened. It's run by two sisters, and they switched it to nonprofit over time.
Were you like, yes?
Yeah. So I when we started with them, they were nonprofit, but they like to tell that story, and I think that says so much about their values, right? It's not about like them individually, and they came from the sector. Like they were early childhood educators who moved and decided to open this center. And so I think it was partly for them. They're like, well, we're never going to take more than what like we need as the leaders of this organization. And so what's the point of also adding this component of profit that, now they're open to being able to get more grants. They're able to be part of the early learning agreement that we have here because of their nonprofit status. But I think it's also like a feeling for their staff, right? Knowing what the structure of the organization is, and that like, even though they're limited by how much that they can pay staff, at least they know, that it's real constraints based on the system and not necessarily based on their desire to like pad their pockets. So,
right. Like they're not showing up in their fancy cars.
Exactly.
And being like, we really are having a hard time. That's the stuff that I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I cannot. So what does it look like for you juggling a 2, 4, 6-year-old consulting, because that's got to be all over the place, and school? Like, what is that? You're in the like, how do you do it all like phase of it, where people are like, how do you do it all? And oftentimes I think the answer could be like, I don't sleep or whatever. But like, how does one go to school and do all of the things?
Well, Ashley, I will tell you that I laughed last night when my son, who's 2, woke up at 3 a.m. and was up for like an hour and a half. And I was like, this is what I'm coming to talk about, right? This is it. I think, I struggle when we talk about, like, I really do agree with the importance of sleep, but I think there are lots of times where that's not actually a reality. And so for me, having 3 kids, and my husband works midnights, so I'm alone with them during the night. So sleep does end up being something that gets sacrificed, because it's like whack-a-mole, like throw a sickness in the house and they're waking each other up with their coughs every couple of hours. And I'm like, okay, got you back to sleep. Next one. And they're still all young enough that they need that, like, parent there to help that process happen, which I try to really like enjoy and be in the moment of also, because, I know how fleeting it is, and like how soon my almost 7-year-old will not want that anymore and not need that. But I'm lucky that school has been virtual. And so I've been able to manage that with my schedule as well. I'm actually studying in the US. And, I think it's part of how I ended up in entrepreneurship full time. So I started my company in 2016, which was before I had any kids. But for the most part, from then until June 2023, I was working like part-time or sometimes full-time in organizations and doing the entrepreneurship thing on the side. And that was okay for a while. And then once I had my 3rd son, and again, over here we have great mat leave. And so I was off for a year, and I just couldn't figure out a way to make full-time work in an office work. They had done a return to work situation. And so, it's all those like illnesses and doctor's appointments and like all the little things that you need to do, forgot your water bottle and need to bring it to school, whatever it is, right? And I just like, I couldn't see myself doing that and actually being able to feel any sense of balance. And so that's when I made the choice to move into full-time entrepreneurship. So it gives me that flexible schedule. But actually working on a project evaluating a feminist entrepreneurship program over here. And it's one of the things we also talk a lot about though, because there's so much risk that comes with it, right? And when we talk about that, like financial stability, I think it feels like the golden ticket being in entrepreneurship. I happen to have a skill set and had some connections that made it realistic in that like kind of quick turnaround. But for a lot of folks, it takes a long time. And I mean, even like having clients pay you on time, right? If you're like really relying on that next check, that's a real struggle and a real problem. And so, yeah, I think entrepreneurship has been great for me and has worked for me, but I recognize the privilege that I have in being able to make that work. So,
yeah. I mean, I think that's always important to point out because I think too, like when you start to consider something like entrepreneurship because the schedules, the math doesn't math, as they say, in terms of like the hours in the day and the directions that you've got to go and all of that. I think that people point out that, and this is how you control your schedule. But this idea of like, there is a period of instability for almost everybody, I would say. There is a period of instability in the beginning of entrepreneurship where you're like, I don't know if we're going to make it to like 6 months from now, or we've got to get some clients in here, or I've got to sell this course or this product or this membership. And that has that's another layer on top of trying to do that.
Absolutely. And especially for women where we tend to bootstrap our own businesses, right? Where male entrepreneurs are more likely to access capital investments or grants, anything like that. So, we're just like stringing things together and trying to make it work with whatever income we have. And it took me a really long time. Like it was only, I think, a year ago when I realized how true that was and how much that impacted me. Like that I even identified myself as an entrepreneur and someone who could consider accessing funding outside of like what I earned myself, So I think, I think we need to create systems that flow more money to women and gender diverse entrepreneurs. So, yeah.
I feel like there may or may not, just putting it out there may or may not be overlaps between nonprofit women, motherhood women, and entrepreneurship women. You do more with less, and there is this overwhelming drive and desire to create, like all of those categories are like someone hands you like a bucket of scraps and they're like, if you could make a robot out of this, and you're like, listen, I've never made a robot before. I don't really know what a robot's supposed to look like. I don't even know if I have all the parts, but like, hand me some glue and let's just see what we can get done. And all three of those, it's just the same thing.
Yeah. You just make it work. And that's it. Like it's the scrappy, right? Like we're just going to figure it out. I had a friend who described it as do more with not enough, which is like that idea of kind of making something out of nothing, right? Like we got these few things and like I can turn it into something that becomes enough. But like imagine if I actually had enough to begin with, what I could do with that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's, the work that I'm trying to do is help to attract more funds to those kinds of, nonprofits, entrepreneurs, that kind of thing, to be able to tell their story of what they're doing and the impact that they're making so that they can get more investment, so that they can do more of that and like really also invest in that like research and learning piece around what it is that is potential. Like how can they actually make these system changes and actually, do make like lasting change in communities.
Do you feel like now that you are a mom and the things that like, you said earlier, like eye-opening in terms of the like nonprofit sector, like do you feel like the nonprofit carries over into motherhood in terms of like the lens that you use when it's like, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do this or not, but we'll figure it out? Like, does it flow both ways for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think I'm definitely like bringing elements in, but it's also part of why I like keep working here too, right? I've always from the beginning of my career had that idea of like, we can have a better world, like we can build a better world. And I want to be part of doing that. But now that I have this like real tangible legacy of children, it's even more important. I'm like, I don't want you having these same challenges that like I and my generation are having, right? I don't want the same like racism and, all the different isms that are out there. Like, I don't want those happening when my kids are older and in my position. Like, I think there's so much more potential. And I think if those are all still happening, like, then we're in a really tough place, right? When we think about like climate change and all the things that are going on, if we don't deal with some of these issues now, I don't know what the future looks like for them. So it feels like there's like a reinforced urgency in the work that I'm doing.
Yeah. And I think too, like having the, being able to put a face to the all of that piece, like all of the isms and the fact that you're like, I've navigated this from maybe one or more of those perspectives or those experiences. I don't want this to be. And I really am hopeful that our generation, because so many things are being called out and because so many connections are being made, like the work that you're doing to connect within different nonprofits, like we're all trying to like row the boat with the same paddles here, and we can't like crash into each other and call that success. But also, like when you layer in motherhood and you layer in entrepreneurship, it's like this idea of like a global community is not like a, Lionel Richie singing "We Are the World." Like it is actually a global community. And I think that our generation of just keep calling that out and just keep making the connections and the benefits of being a more connected place is, we can say, like, there's a lot of similarities from things that I experience here. And although everyone jokes that Canada is like the little brother of America and it's like, USA North and all stuff, which it is not. It is not. And I will say that as many times as possible. I will make
I'm
a
actually
commercial
south
for
of Detroit here in Windsor. So,
oh, you're in Windsor. My whole family's from London.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so much fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're close.
2 seconds down the road. So you like Motown.
Yes.
But I think like this idea of calling out all of these different pieces and calling out these connections are what are going to help it be possible. It's not, we don't have to like rewrite the script for our kids when they get older. We're setting the stage in a way that like the only thing left for them to do is to either drive the solutions forward or to continue to build upon the solutions that are being created.
Yeah. And, for me, it's like there are Black voices and Indigenous voices and people with disabilities who have been saying these things for a long time. Mm-hmm. And, I think there was this approach of like not trusting people for a really long time. And so for me, especially from like the place that I'm in from an evaluation perspective, where that sometimes still holds some leverage with governments and other like powers that be, being able to amplify those voices and really like add some support around like providing evidence for what they've been saying all along is a really integral part of this as well, right? Like I think that like I said, the solutions are there and people have been doing them, especially like in those grassroots community kind of efforts. And so it's just a matter of like bringing those up and recognizing that those are valuable and that, we can't have cookie cutter solutions.
Yeah. And I think it's like really important to point out that are people that are doing things that don't look like you and I, or don't sound like you and I, that have been doing the things in terms of like on the ground work and also calling these things out and not being heard. And so it's this idea of like showing up and being also versus I'm the person who created this solution. Like, I think that's really helpful in terms of moving forward in like in a more collective manner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. So what is the next little bit of time in life look like for you?
Mm-hmm. So
the motherhood question.
Yeah. So moving into my dissertation, and actually like relevant to that, I'm hoping to do some work where I actually hear from nonprofit organizations about how they're using evaluation and how evaluators can better support them to do their work. And so that's a little bit of a flip from what a lot of research on evaluation looks like. So really hoping to learn a lot from that. And then, continuing on working with these organizations and like keep trying to bring them together and pull things together and find those really innovative solutions organizations that might be able to be applied in different places than they are now. And then for motherhood, my middle daughter started school this year, so supporting them. I got parent-teacher interviews today, and just trying to keep them growing.
Yeah, I know. We're in the like feed, water, sunlight stage of life, and then like going into the winter, it's like feed, water, Tylenol.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that was trying to make sure that like I can balance my workload with kids. And that was something that like in my first year of entrepreneurship, I didn't do well, was like recognize how much time I would have to take away. And so being like in an hourly based kind of position, having to actually like reduce the number of hours that I'm available to do that. So learning as I go.
I know. It's hard because motherhood is these hard boundaries, right, around your time. And I think that's the part that so many people, before they have children, they go in and they're like, I'll be able to do it all. It's one more thing. And you're like, no, it's hard boundaries, but it actually is not hard boundaries like barriers on the side of the highway. It's like every once in a while, there'll be a barrier right in the middle of the road. So
exactly. That shows up right in front of your car when you don't expect it at all. And like, I was actually surprised that everyone made it to school and daycare today, because I feel like every time I do something like this, somebody's home.
Yeah.
Like trying to negotiate that. So
yeah, it's like Mario Kart. Like motherhood is Mario Kart. Everyone thinks it's like, the I-95 from Maine to Florida, like just straight on, carrying on. It's not. No, it's Mario Kart.
Every once in a while, there's a fireball coming. Yeah.
Yes. That's the fever and, all of those pieces. Oh, I like this analogy a lot. It's a good one. Oh, I love it. Well, can you let everyone know how they can get in touch with you, and especially any nonprofit people that are listening that are really interested in being part of an evaluation piece that you're doing, or that just want to reach out and maybe get some more information from you about the work that you're putting out there?
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. My name, Allison Prieur. And I have a website, dareic.com.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Ashley. It was really nice to talk to you.